Okay, welcome to BS&BEER Canada, everybody. This evening, I am drinking a off-grid pale ale, and I thought it was appropriate because this brewery uses no grid-tied energy. It's entirely brewed off-grid. And before I introduce our guest, I'm gonna pass this over to Thomas.
Hello, Aaron. Well, I'm coming to you from Whatcom County. I'm down in my little piece of paradise down in the south right now. So that's why I'm drinking the Kirkland hard seltzers at 80 cents a can. You can't beat it down here. Yeah, it's beautiful weather. How's your weather out there?
Well, today hey Peter.
Good for having a good beer. It was nice weather for drinking beer.
It was a little warm today. By island standards, it wasn't warm by probably Kelowna standards, where our guest is, but it was on the warm side for here. We were above 30 today, and that's about as hot as it gets here. So
Yeah, that's pretty warm.
anyways, without further ado, I'd like to introduce everyone to our guest this evening. He is definitely amped up to be here, although he's probably more concerned about your watts per metered square than he is how many amps you have. Without further ado, this is Brett. He's going to fill us in a little bit about what it's like to be an energy advisor and some of the ins and outs to make your life easier working with one. And, well, some of the stuff that they can actually do to make your life easier.
Thanks, Aaron. Nice to be here. Yeah, my name is Brett Tracy. I'm in West Kelowna, BC. I think you guys were actually hotter than us. We've been having a really seasonally mild spring, which is I've been enjoying. I hate it when it's above 30. But yeah, it's been great. I am drinking tonight a yellow dog, Chase My Tail Pale Ale, brewed in Port Moody, one of my favorite pales. And yeah, we'll get started here. I'll share my screen. Let me know if everybody can see. Good to go. Right on. So yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about working with an energy advisor, where we're trying to get the industry to go. It'll be a lot of kind of BC perspective. I know that there's tiered codes coming in throughout different provinces, but if anyone has any questions throughout, feel free to ask. So we'll start pretty entry level. What is an energy advisor? So we're registered with Natural Resources Canada to deliver the EnerGuide rating system. We build energy models of existing housing and new construction to figure out the performance, how the building's going to perform. We deliver additional programs like the NECB, BC Step Code, CHP Net Zero program, Energy Star for new homes, R2000, that sort of thing. So we work with builders and homeowners to provide practical insight into achieving energy compliance goals and helping to identify some financial incentives for projects as well. So the main reasons it's good to work with an energy advisor in BC now, it's mandatory on all new construction. You need to have code compliance done. So we get the plans, the proposed plans from the builder, developer, homeowner, whoever it may be, build the energy model, talk about the goals, what level of tiered code do we want to hit? So benchmarking and optimization. So it's a more strategic way to build goal-oriented. We can address more issues and avoid kind of change orders later in the build process by planning in advance. We look at the house as a system approach. We can offer integrated design, which is really great. It's been a challenge lately. It's really important to get in early, even before plans start to get drawn. And then we can look at ways of potentially saving costs too, rather just kind of flying by the seat of your pants and hoping for the best. It gets expensive when you have to make changes later on.
we should mention, Brett, that not everybody has to hit those tiers or the step code, depending on where you are in Canada. But if this isn't a requirement yet, it's coming.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. So yeah, in BC, it became a requirement May of last year. So we're into it for a little while now. It was up to the individual municipality to adopt the tiers prior, but then the province mandated it. And I know there's something coming down the pipeline for Alberta, I think Ontario as well. So it's good to kind of get ahead of the curve so that you're not left struggling to figure it out when your hand is kind of forced into it. But this is kind of the way I threw the slide in here because we all kind of know how we should be building, how we want to be building, right? So a few key points in here. Renewables, not necessary, but there's been a lot of uptake in it in the past few years, especially with rebate programs. So if we can at least build houses that are, solar ready, conduits run, it makes it a lot easier for people to implement that down the road if they want to. Obviously, air tightness, one of the main things that we're looking at. Energy management's going to be coming up in the future when we can start to look at load management and load shedding. We're already running into issues with, having enough grid supply. So if we can start having some smart energy management in houses, that'll be very beneficial. Continuous insulation on the exterior. Appliances, obviously, fresh air, HRVs, ERVs, heat pump water heaters, water management, low flow faucets, drain water heat recovery, good windows and doors, heat pumps, that sort of thing, under slab, sub slab, and a car charger if you so wish. So kind of where we've been going as an industry, at least in BC, we're wanting to build more efficient, more sustainable, durable, comfortable, and healthy homes, reducing energy consumption, greenhouse gas emissions on the national level. That's the goal of Natural Resources Canada. We're trying to label all homes, reduce the carbon, embodied carbon, operational carbon, and the greenhouse gas emissions from housing. So how do we get there? We need to work collectively as a building community, continuing to educate ourselves, trades we work with, collaborating with each other, other industry professionals. That's what BS&BEER is all about. Adopting new technologies. I know all this stuff takes time, right? But you really have to take it on yourself. Nobody's going to do it for you. So you really need to set time aside in your schedule to start looking at some of these things. There's lots of free training and education out there through different organizations. So if you can get on some mailing lists and attend some webinars, it's an easy way to start learning some of this stuff. And just shift our way of thinking, the way that we've been building the past, 50 years. We're going to have to make some significant changes to get to the goals in the next 10 years, the pretty lofty goals that the whole industry kind of needs to shift and get on board with, at least in BC. So there's challenges that come with that. Managing costs. Obviously, everything's gotten a lot more expensive in the last little bit. Triple glazed windows cost more. Heat pumps cost more. Managing client expectations is a big one. We have a lot of glazing happening in the new construction here, and it's just kind of an inefficient way to build. But I mean, that's what people want. People work really hard. They want to build their nice house. So it's a bit of a juggling act. Some supply chain issues. Trying to figure out new homes versus retrofits. How do we achieve, our targets on both sides of things? And then custom home builders versus developments. Custom homes you're typically building, for that client. There's a lot of dreams and aspirations there. And then developments, a lot of times it's code minimum, build them, it's cost effective and turn them over. So challenges on both sides of that. And then looking into other, technologies, modular, prefab, and then obviously municipal regulations and zoning can be a challenge sometimes too. Different municipalities all have different requirements, which, it'd be nice if it was standardized province-wide, but that's what we work with.
Just to quickly ask a question there, Brett. You mentioned cost. Do you ever take the time to educate people on okay, yes, it costs more upfront, but this is going to be, if you do triple glaze instead of double pane, you're going to save X a year on this project. Do you do any of that, or is it just kind of
Yeah, like
as is?
not costing it out exactly, but definitely that conversation is had. Like, where you will spend, maybe 10 or 15% more upfront to do some of these things. But in the long run, the goal is to have very low operational costs, right? Low utility bills. And I don't know if anybody was on the air quality webinar earlier today. I stole some slides from it, but they were talking about new window technology, and they did some pretty interesting research on payback periods of upgrading from like a double glazed to a triple glazed, and the payback period, one with like carbon offsets and two with cost, and it was about a 3-year difference. So the payback's really not that far down the road. So we'll see some of those in a bit here. So looking at ways of how technology can help us achieve our goals and overcome the challenges and objections. So there's a lot of concerns with a lot of like big, quick changes happening in the industry, right? Getting trades on board to help support the changes can be challenging. We hear a lot of stuff from clients, and this just gets passed through, the woodwork of people speaking with each other and people who have had bad experiences with some technology. But we hear it all the time that like heat pumps don't work in cold climates. EVs are worse for the environment than gas vehicles, the manufacturing side of things. The grid can't support this push to electrification. Electricity is more expensive than gas, which that's not wrong, but we can supplement that with renewable energy. And then just people not believing that, our environment is in danger. So some solutions to those things. There's a lot of good technology coming out. Higher efficiency mechanical equipment, heat pumps of all types. So cold climate air source heat pumps, ground source heat pumps, domestic hot water heat pumps, air to water heat pumps of all shapes and sizes. So way more efficient than our current systems. Retrofitting existing houses to free up additional grid space. So if we can get some houses that are on either all electric and they've got old electric furnaces that are like 100 amp draw, we can switch those over to heat pumps or baseboard heat. You've got 1 kilowatt going in, then your COP of 2.5, it's just going a lot further rather than a 1-to-1 ratio. So adopting some of these technologies and retrofitting older houses should free up some grid capacity for other things. And then looking into renewables and storage systems. And then some of the not so obvious things that we can do to overcome some of these challenges is smart home monitoring systems, load management, peak times of the day, load shedding. There's a lot of people out there doing really good work in regards to managing electrical loads and like time of day things. And I was at a CHPA event the other day with a fellow who's installing load management systems, and he could show me on this app on his phone, and he could literally he had all of his loads, and he could just flick stuff off or dial them down, so he could just see how many kilowatts that was pulling and either just turn it off, and static or passive draws on everything. So it's really neat technology to see. And I think it's going to come down the pipeline even more if we can start monitoring these loads and then reducing them, because there's going to be like peak hour billing coming in, and BC Hydro has 2-tier billing, which is our goal to retrofit our house with solar just to get out of that higher rate bracket, because we kind of get hammered on those. So there's smart ways that we can address some of these challenges. And then some not so techie solutions to overcoming this large push. So we want by 2032 in BC, we want houses to be 70% more efficient, and then beyond that is net zero. So we've got a pretty short time frame to achieve these goals. The next tier, I think, is planned for 2027. So we're currently 20% more efficient than base code. 2027, we're going to be 40%. 2032, it's going to be 70%, and then net zero is beyond. So if we can plan more at the design stage, it really helps. It gets expensive if we get a set of plans and there's like a whole 2 stories of south-facing glazing, it's really hard to go back to the client and tell them, sorry, you can't have all this glass. But you basically have to go to triple glaze to get it to pass code compliance. So if we can work together, collaborate a little more earlier on, we can manage those costs a little better. Simple houses perform better and cost less. simple structures, I should say. We can do some architectural detailing outside of the building envelope components, would be great. But when you have a lot of kind of jogs and exposed floor areas and lots of framing, there's not a lot of space for insulation in there. And in most cases, just smart design, you can overcome a lot of challenges. Just orientation, shape of the house, they really heavily influence the efficiency of the home. So we can look at the orientation on the lot and the glazing and all of that sort of stuff before we start kind of getting too far down the build process. It'll help everybody out a lot. We're kind of still stuck in this process the way that we've been building, and it's like there's just, you go through, you get your plans, and then you have your builder, and then you have your individual trades come in. We got to collaborate a lot more and avoid a lot of challenges throughout. So these are just some examples. Sorry for the grainy pictures that you're just off of Google here, but some examples of more simple structures, right? They're almost all somewhat square. You can still have your cathedral ceilings or your shed roofs, your nice slope and some glass in there, but just not having really complex geometry will help you pass energy efficiency requirements and probably save you on the budget too. So you can
Corners
get creative.
cost money.
What's that?
Sorry, Brett. Corners cost money.
Corners cost money.
They cost money to build, and they cost money for the rest of the life of that building. Sorry to cut you off there, but simple designs, man. Sorry, I'm loving the pictures.
Yeah, no, it's great. My neighbor down the road, I was riding by his house in the, actually pulling my kid on a toboggan by his house in the winter. And he has, a classic, it's like a 1.5 by 7 foot little jog out for the primary bathroom. And his pipes were frozen because the plumbing runs through that little tiny exposed floor section. And he was asking me what he can do about it. And I have our washroom, which is above our garage. It's a half story. And every year, if it's like below -15, the toilet freezes. And I have to throw a little heater in there to get it but just because it's terrible geometry and where the services run just gets too cold. So then here's some examples of some complicated structures, right? We're trying to avoid a lot of framing and lumber. All these little areas. Can you guys see my cursor? Yeah, okay. If you look at some of these walls and you picture the framing in here, right? Like all these little bump outs, not a lot of space for insulation. Obviously this is just a ton of glazing. They're beautiful houses, but there's a give and take. These are two kind of extremes, right? If we can build somewhere in the middle of the simple structures, somewhere in here, I mean, you're still going to have people that have a lot of money that want to build really fancy houses. It's just going to cost a lot more money, but I think we're talking about pushing the mainstream direction of your average consumer and how to get there in a cost-effective way, in an energy-efficient way. So somewhere in between these two would be great. So how energy advisors can make builders' lives easier. It's really simple. We assist with everything you need to build better homes. If you have a question about something, just call your energy advisor and ask them. I think we all try and be really responsive. And we're constantly doing all this training in the background so that you kind of don't have to. It's a lot of ongoing education constantly. Things are changing really quick. And typically, if it's me, like if I can't answer a problem or a question, we'll point you to someone who can, or we'll find out for you. And then the way that I've found it to be the easiest way is for people that haven't had to go through step code or tiered codes before, is we have checklists. Like if you're ready for your mid-construction test, I'll send you a checklist and be like, make sure all these items are dialed in before you call me, before I show up on site, because it sucks to show up on site for a mid-construction test and there's like a 16-foot bifold door that's like not polyed over or whatever else. And they're like, don't worry, we'll have it done in 15 minutes. And like an hour and a half later, you're still kind of standing there. So we need to definitely work together to achieve this. And how builders can make energy advisors' lives easier. Communication, better communication. If you need to make a change, let us know. I was at a mid-construction yesterday and I show up in all the glazings like completely different than the plan set that we have. So now we have to go back and change the model. But it also throws off your air changes. This guy had to hit a more strict air change requirement than base for it to pass. So by reducing some of the glazing here, we probably could have relaxed that air change requirement a little bit. And don't rely solely on one trade for your air barrier. So that's like, it puts a lot of stress on the insulators if you're not thinking about it at the framing stage. Everybody's got to come together to hit these targets. So when you're just relying on your insulators to seal up and poly the house, and all the other penetrations aren't sealed, like you're just doing yourself a disservice. And the insulators, because they're going to have to come back. So as a builder, the project manager on site, communicate your goals with other trades. Everybody should be aligned in the goals of the project. And this is once again changing the kind of thinking of the way that we've been doing things before, just a lot more collaborative way of building. Review the information from your energy advisor to make sure that you're actually installing things that were spec'd out in the energy model. There's nothing worse than showing up and it's like, oh, these windows aren't what we had talked about, or we spec'd a heat pump on this house and there's a 14 SEER AC. Like, that's not going to work out. So that's when things get expensive, right? We want to really, we don't just issue you a code compliance report for the fun of it. Like, you have to follow these requirements, and the building inspectors are walking through with our energy compliance report too, and making sure that that stuff's checked off the list. So really important to follow those. I know it's like an extra step that we have to adjust to, but it's an important one. And then just not rushing through the build process. I think this is where, like, developers, if you're building like a golf course community, you've got 100 houses to build and you're pumping these things out. It's business, and the faster you can get them done, the more money you make. But certain things you just don't want to rush because it's going to cost you in the long run if you have to come back and fix mistakes. So if you can take a little more time, I think air sealing is the big one, a little more due diligence, have someone walk around the site and just, check things out, start sealing things at the framing stage, get your framers involved. It just helps everybody gasket all your penetrations, that sort of thing. When you rush, if you fail your blower door testing, it's a lot more of a hassle. So I'll just run through where BC is at currently. What are we doing for time here? I'm gonna have to speed up a little bit. So BC's got this tiered building code. We talked about this already. We're currently at step 3, so 20% more efficient than base. 2027, 40%. Step 5. I don't think it's actually net zero. I think it's just 70% more. Net zero is a whole nother kind of labeling program. They've introduced zero carbon code in BC. It's kind of controversial right now. They're still developing it. Right now, it's up to the individual municipality to adopt it. Some have, some haven't. There's different tiers of that too. But basically what they're trying to achieve is that they want the primary space in water heating to be zero carbon by 2030. So right now where I'm at in the Okanagan, we're a measure only, and then it kind of goes up in tiers. And something important to note here is that this is for indoor equipment only, so you can still have your outdoor gas fire pits, your pool heaters, your driveway heaters, whatever else. So that's kind of like where, I don't know, it's like, does it make sense if you have a house in Whistler that's got like a, massive outdoor gas fire pit that's just burning 80,000 BTU or whatever it is constantly, but you can't have it in your house when it's a controlled environment. I don't know. You burn a lot more gas in a pool and a heated driveway and an outdoor fire pit than I think you would inside your house, but who knows? So looking at carbon, once again, this is kind of like different life cycle stages. So the upfront and embodied carbon of materials, we're not looking at that yet. We're just looking at operational carbon, but it's going to be coming down the pipeline. So manufacturing, transportation, construction, maintenance, and repair. Give slide credit here to Building Knowledge Canada. Operational carbon is where we're currently measuring, and then end of life cycle, that stuff's going to the landfill at some point. So we want to look at all the building materials and how they kind of interact with our environment, manufacturing to kind of grave. So a little more about why working with an energy advisor is important if you're somewhere in the country where it's not mandatory yet. Access to information, we're a really good source of information. We can help you with different financial incentives. A lot of these incentives are designed to help you get to like more efficient building codes. So there's some pretty good ones out there that I'll cover in a minute. Obviously, energy modeling and code compliance, we can try and look at modeling. There's a lot of really good tools out there we can input the energy model and it'll tell us the most cost-effective way to hit your targets. Like cost benefit analysis tools. Mark Bernhardt from Bernhardt Contracting has a really good tool called Heat. It maps out a lot of really neat stuff. So there's a lot of resources out there we can use to hit our targets and hopefully not increase the cost of the project. And more solution-based thinking than kind of dealing with stuff after it's happened. And then obviously testing, diagnostics. And if you're building high performance houses, you want to be able to market those and sell them to your clients as well. So talk about health and safety, improved air quality, indoor air quality, shielding against severe weather conditions. We're in a really bad forest fire area here, burnt right up to the back of my house last year. Increased comfort, obviously, if you're having triple glazed and well insulated assemblies, you're not going to have those, cold feelings when you're by glass and things like that. Hopefully you're going to have lower operating costs, lower utility bills. That's how you balance maybe the higher upfront cost, lower operational costs, and then just peace of mind knowing that you're in a well-built house that's hopefully going to be safe and comfortable, durable for a really long time. So in BC, we've got 3 metrics that you need to pass to achieve code compliance. You got the building envelope, which is like the thermal energy demand. So your insulation, your windows, your mechanical energy use, so all your mechanical equipment, and then your air tightness. This is what kind of code compliance checklist, I guess you would call it, looks like. So there's options to pass each one of these metrics, which is really nice because if you aren't making it quite on one, then you can make it on the other. So you basically put your energy model into this code compliance spreadsheet and it'll auto-populate for you and tell you if your house is going to pass or not. And then you can go back and make adjustments. But you can either pass, there's a metric that you need to hit on the mechanical energy use, or you can be 20% better. Like if this was step 4, it would be 40% better. So it shows you. Same thing on thermal energy demand. There's a metric that you have to hit, or you can that's a heat loss reduction from a base house. Air change requirements. And for what we found is that smaller houses have a lot harder time hitting the ACH metric because there's less surface area for that leakage to come from. So you can pass on these other 2 metrics, which take into account like the actual surface area of the building rather than just the volume. And then a lot of financial incentives available for builders through like national programs and provincial programs. So CMHC has a bunch of programs. There's green mortgage programs. We'll rip through some of them. This is the new Fortis BC rebate program. So if you hit, they're not incentivizing step 3 anymore because it's mandatory, but if you hit step 4 or step 5, that's 15,000 to the builder, 20,000 to the builder. There's incentives for support for energy advisors, utilities, and then integrated design process, mechanical design. So pretty heavy incentives to hit higher tiers. And a lot of times this covers the cost in, hiring some of these folks to do some of these things, have a more integrated design process. MLI Select is a multi-unit product from CMHC. So you get really increased lending benefits by having energy efficient houses. It's not just energy efficiency. You can have accessible dwellings or low rents too. So you can have amortization up to 50 years, increased loan to value, that sort of thing. We'll breeze through a bunch of this, but 5 units or more basically qualifies you. So townhomes or low rise multi-units. Eco Plus is for single family new construction. So if you're a first time home buyer and you're CMHC insured, you can get a 25% premium refund if you can build a house that's 20% more efficient than base code. This is the same program, but for existing houses. So if you buy a new house and you spend $20,000 in energy efficient renovations, you're also eligible for that same premium refund. First time home buyers that are CMHC insured. This is a multi-generational tax credit for people wanting to do a renovation for like a secondary suite if you have to move an elderly person into your basement or something like that. So the main thing is that there's lots of funding out there, lots of different programs, lots of ways to get financial incentives. There's the greener homes. I think everybody's fairly familiar with this now. You got your $40,000 loan, your heat pump program. This is that Canada Greener Affordable Housing Program. This one's fairly new, but quite a bit of funding available for projects in there. Provincial rebates. And then we'll hop into a little bit of the building science here, because that's why we're all here. Everybody's, I'm sure, seen these, but basically this is the goal of Natural Resources Canada and through this home labeling program. There's older ones. If you've seen an old black and white label, they're not really in service anymore. It's a 0 to 100 scale, and 100 was better. And now we're trying to get down to 0 gigajoules. So the lower the number, the better on this new rating scale. But basically, when we produce an energy model, it'll show you how much energy this consumes per year. That's gas, electricity, everything together in gigajoules a year. And then it rates it against that same house as if it was built to base code. And then a bunch of metrics. So I threw this in here. This is from some of the net zero training, but I just thought it was interesting, some reference points to find out how much is like 1 gigajoule. So if you surf the web, it's 5,500 hours. If you vacuum your house, it's 230 hours. Run your refrigerator for 30 weeks, toast 3,000 bagels. That's this one. Watch an entire National Hockey League season, all 1,230 games. Wash 100 loads of laundry. So you get the idea. It's a lot of energy. So these are some kind of pie charts from back in the day of showing you how houses use energy. So before 3/4 was, heating the house, and then a little bit of lighting and appliances and hot water. That's 1982. Fast forward to 2015, it's kind of cut in half now. Houses use about 100 gigajoules a year. Space heating is about 50% of that. Water heating is 20. Occupant loads become a bigger piece of the pie, and then cooling. I think cooling is going to become larger here as well. And then this is, if you were to build a net zero house, 2,300 square feet. So now you've dropped it down to 43 gigajoules a year. Your occupant loads become a way bigger piece of the pie. Your space heating and cooling is much less heat loss through the building, excuse me. And water heating, domestic hot water, becomes a much bigger factor too. The thing with the EnerGuide rating labels, and some people don't like this, is that they've standardized this across the country, right? They have to have this label make sense in all different climate zones across the country and through all different housing types. So the one thing that they've standardized is the occupant loads. So when we build an energy model of the existing house, we don't actually get the utilities from the customer. We can input that data, but for the EnerGuide label's sake, they assume that 2 adults and 1 child are at home 50% of the time. So sometimes when you're doing an energy assessment on an existing house and the customer is really in tune with their utility costs, they're kind of upset because it's not accurate in the way that they actually use the house. But that's because if they sell the house, and if it's like a retiree couple of 2, they're going to use a lot less energy, a lot less hot water than if a family moves in with like 8 kids, and now the operational loads go way up, and now your label's not accurate anymore. So just something to note when you see those labels, that the occupant loads are kind of standardized. So interesting stats on window to wall ratio. I think everybody knows that we see this around, in the neighborhoods, that the glazing is becoming a lot more significant, introduces a challenge, gets more expensive too. So just something to be cautious of if you're building and designing, that glazing can get complicated. Here, a key takeaway on this, I just thought it was an interesting stat. So above 20% window to wall ratio is where they're saying that you'll get more benefit out of using triple glaze than you will with adding exterior insulation. So building with R20 walls and triple glazed windows has a higher effective R value than a building with R20 bats and R10 on the exterior and double glazed. So at some point, you're getting diminished returns by adding a ton of insulation on the exterior if you're still building with double glazed windows. And obviously there's a lot of debate around whether to go fully exterior insulated assemblies and just leave surface cavity, go back to 2x4 building. There's lots of different ways you can do it. Just thought it was interesting that at some point, if you're trying to avoid going to triple glazed windows, at some point it doesn't make sense. So this was from Building Knowledge Today. I'll give them credit on these slides. This is it was a window webinar, and I don't know if anybody saw it. Sorry for the repeat, but I thought it was really interesting to share kind of the same idea on glazing, but basically what they're saying is that this is like a base code house, like an archetype house. So these are triple glazed windows. I have the specs in another slide here. But if you were to only do one of these upgrades, so whether you do triple glazed or get your air changes down to 1.5, or you do R5 on the exterior, R10, here's your reduction in energy and your reduction in carbon. So by going to triple glazed, only upgrading your triple glazed, leaving your air changes the same, you get a 7% reduction in energy and an 11% reduction in carbon emissions. That's, obviously you're improving the building envelope. So you're making your building more efficient by adding triple glazed windows. Same thing with reducing the air changes. It's pretty similar, whether you're going to drop the air changes. This is in Toronto, I'll add, climate zone 5. So windows or air changes in this climate zone are similar, and then diminish returns by adding exterior insulation on by keeping double glazed. What is this? Okay, so it's important to note this is at a 12% window to wall ratio. So now we go up 17% window to wall ratio. You can see how the metrics kind of change here. Windows play a bigger factor the more glazing you have, which makes sense. Windows are more important than air tightness the more glazing you have. Really interesting. At 22% window to wall ratio, this is all still same climate zone windows. Once again, your air changes basically stay the same. Your reduction in energy loss, heat loss, and CO2 stay the same, but huge improvements going to triple glaze the more window to wall ratio you have. So it's hard when we're modeling houses and we have a house with a lot of glass and they don't want to go to triple glaze. They're like, let's just increase the insulation. It's like at some point, it doesn't make sense to just keep slapping insulation at the house because your biggest heat loss is the glazing. And so now they've had it mapped out on a chart, which is kind of interesting. So your gigajoules up here and your window to wall ratio. So you can see that in your base code house, it's the least efficient. If you were to do R5 on the exterior, it becomes more efficient. R10 on the exterior, more efficient still. If you were to drop it to 1.5 air change, there's a crossover point here where the windows become more important than the air changes. So that's about 14% window to wall ratio. It makes more sense to have energy efficient windows than it does to reduce the air tightness of the house. And this is the same graph, but for operational carbon. And that is a triple glazed window with a U factor of 0.85, solar heat gain coefficient of 0.4, which I feel like is kind of high for a triple. You'd probably be down to like 0.3 or 0.25 would be a little bit better. And now this is a different climate zone. This is Winnipeg. So it's even more interesting to see as you go to a colder climate zone, the effect that this has. Windows play an even bigger part. Once again, looking at your air change line, which is going to be your most energy efficient thing, more so than insulation. But as you get into colder climate zones, there's more heat loss through the glazing. Going to triple glazed makes a lot more sense. And then what they kind of did here too is just map out your heat loss through your base house versus a house with triple glazed windows. And basically what they found is that you're going to lose a lot more heat out of double glazed, which I think is fairly obvious, but you can reduce the sizing of your mechanical equipment fairly significantly by upgrading to a better window package. And then, like I said earlier, I think it's about a 3-year payback to upgrade those windows to triple in like life cycle costing of the building and your utility costs. So not too significant.
We should
How are we doing for
throw
time
in,
here, Aaron?
you're doing all right. We're still doing good, but we should throw in there as well that yes, you're going to pay more for those windows, but the extra cost in the windows is going to be made up partially by the reduction in your mechanical costs.
Exactly. Yeah, you're not going to spend. You don't have to buy your 4-ton heat pump and your 80,000 BTU furnace or whatever it is, right? You can half the size, and maybe mechanical contractors don't like that. I have had that feedback. They're like, oh, well, now I want to sell a bigger system. So, so it's like that balance. Once again, it's, it's not all about.
Yeah, it comes down to education. I've been in houses where the heat pumps keep burning up because they're short cycling.
Right.
Those
Yeah.
they're just like
Oversize it.
it's a 1,200 square foot bungalow. It doesn't need a 5-ton unit.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we do see some pretty large, large systems. I thought I just tossed this in here again. We're getting to the end here. Talking about exterior insulation and condensation control and dew point, I always find these, to go back through some of these slides and some of this education when you go through, it's always good to kind of remind yourself. So this is your classic 2x6 R20 wall. When you get down to 5 degrees, the risk for condensation increases quite a bit. So what they're saying here is that by adding insulation to the exterior of the building, you're bringing that sheathing into the warmer plane, and it's not going to condense and cause moisture issues. So a lot of people are building with 2x8s and trying to push insulation more to the interior of the envelope, but what that does is it increases the condensation potential in that wall assembly. So just something to be cautious of. And then you can show same graph, but if you have R5 on the exterior, greatly reduces the potential for condensation on that sheathing through the heating season. And this is another interesting one. So this is how much moisture or vapor can move through your classic sheet of drywall through a heating season. So it's about 1/3 of a liter. And then you can see, talking once again about air tightness and how important it is. If you have a little hole in your wall, how much more moisture can get through that wall assembly just by having penetrations that aren't sealed properly. So we want to make sure that, and I have a real case study slide coming up that shows kind of some mold in an interior wall cavity from that. Net zero home, it's just important to notice that this is outside of like tiered building codes. It's a national program through CHBA. Anybody can build to this standard. If you're an energy advisor, you have to take a special course to be a net zero energy advisor. If you're a builder, same thing. If you're a renovator, same thing. So good training to go through, even if you don't want to build to that standard, it's good education to have. And then I just threw some slides in from some actual houses. So this is like our typical, in my area anyway, in Kelowna, like these are your single family homes that are getting built now. So they're very big. They have a lot of glazing. Sometimes they can be pretty complicated geometry, and they can be hard to pass metrics in a cost-effective way. I think that's the biggest point I'm trying to drive home here. Like, one of the biggest complaints is that building's getting too expensive and everything's getting too expensive. And it's like, okay, well, we don't, we got to kind of give and take a little bit. Sometimes we don't need, 2 floors with south-facing glazing that there's no insulation in the assembly anymore. Do you need 3 16-foot bifold patio doors side by side by side? But once again, it's custom homes, dream houses. They're expensive. This is that house at the mid-construction stage. So trying to diagnose some leakage here. We were at like 4.85. And after 2 hours on site trying to air seal, we could only get it down to like 4.4. So there were some really significant leaks. So I had to return with the fog machine, and we smoked the whole house and found that the buffered wall in between the house and the garage was leaking significantly. Through these HVAC penetrations, there's just a lot of spray foam trying to seal that up along the whole top plate here into the garage. I basically threw everywhere on that wall, and we've got kind of uninsulated HVAC penetrations going into the living area above, which needs some more attention and detail and insulation and air sealing. Like, technically, those should be brought into the interior environment, not just be running uninsulated through an unconditioned space. But this is all part of education and learning. So this is that same kind of HVAC cavity, and they've got the central vac running through the corner here, and there's basically just one bat. And you can see the poly's not adhered to anything. There is one bat just kind of stuffed in the corner there, and it was just pulling air like straight through. So just challenging things to find if you're not testing your house, and knowing where these are and trying to get above these penetrations and seal this stuff properly can be really hard. And this photo on the right-hand side of the screen here, you can see a little bit of mold on the backside of the drywall. And what this is a buffered wall into a garage as well. And you're looking from the garage into the backside of the drywall at the house. So moisture laden air, we think, was getting in through the electrical outlet and then getting stuck in that wall cavity and causing some moisture and some mold in here. And how they found us was they're getting solar installed at their house and running some wires for solar, and then pulled the drywall off and realized that there's some mold in there. So we don't trying to figure out exactly, you know, where that came from, how to remediate it, and I'll leave that open to the floor here on some of these items. Like I'd be interested to have some thoughts on some of these items, like, you know, addressing these HVAC issues appropriately and some of these other issues that we typically find, but we'll wrap it up at that. So basically, in recap, what energy advisors do: we're energy modeling, code compliance, blower door testing, verification, existing home, energy audits, labeling. We can do heat load calculations for sizing HVAC equipment, different labeling programs that we talked about, address multi-unit, low-rise multi-unit, Energy Star for new homes, and help in integrated design. And that's all I got.
Well, thank you very much, Brett. Hopefully everybody got more than what they bargained for there. Couple of quick questions though. The checklist that you mentioned earlier, is there any chance you'd be willing to share them? Maybe not right now, but later with our audience that might view afterwards, or we can make it part of another show or something.
Yeah, definitely.
Just for the people who don't work with, you know, energy advisors on a regular basis, and, you know, are trying to build better, it can give them a checklist that they can reference themselves to improve.
Yeah, 100%. They're basically just like a one-page document. It's just like, you know, have you hit this point? Have you thought about this? Is that sealed? You know, all that sort of thing. So absolutely, yeah, we can share that.
That's all I've got for a second. I do have one more question, but I gotta find it.
Hey Brett, this is Connor.
Hey, Connor.
Great ideas. I think we were talking about is so important, and I think it talks about how sort of nuanced and multifaceted what we're trying to do is. Where you're mentioning how important it is for an EA to be involved early in the project, for a builder to understand how to really read and comply with the spec package, and follow all of your recommendations, and then through the project, you know, take the set of drawings and break it into a sequence set of steps so they can avoid or maybe get ahead of some of those HVAC penetrations and get those results. And even out here, maybe Aaron and Thomas, even people that are experienced, it's still hard on a project to. You made that comment around just, you know, take your time and make sure you're building it well, and I'm like, but your window is coming from Poland and one sent the wrong size, and now you're waiting 14 weeks to get a new one. I'm that person with one side of my building open that I can't, and I've got drywall coming in. Like, it's just to recognize how what you're saying is completely valid, and I think your services are incredibly warranted to help lead people through those first few projects to get their head around
Yeah.
what you do.
It's challenging for sure. There's so much going on, and like, you know, people want to move on with the project, and having to come in and, you know, do the mid-construction border test, and like typically it's like their insulators are in, I'm there, drywall's like scheduled to come next day.
Yeah.
So it's like, if you fail the mid-con, like drywallers are showing up. I hate being on site with other trades because I'd rather have the house for like, you
That's
know,
it.
couple hours, but it's just the
Yeah.
sequencing, right, is really challenging. And
The classic thing. That's right. The classic thing growing up was insulation. That point for us was done by the drywall covers. They did fiberglass bat, they did 6 mil poly, and they did board, and they were paid by unit pricing. So they were flying through that place. If they were done on a Wednesday, inspection was booked that day, and drywall started the next morning.
Yeah.
The thing you were worrying about was, did I put backing in the wall for toilet paper holders? You know, the crucial stuff.
Yeah.
Well, later do you realize, oh, that hole we cut was never taped. Oh, that was never taped. And I can tell you, if we didn't have our own blower door within our own company, even though we hit a very respectable number for our project, I don't know how we would have scheduled it, because we were ready that night, Friday at 10 p.m., and we had dense pack starting like the next day.
Yeah.
It's tricky.
Yeah. I think for anybody listening who isn't currently, having to meet air change requirements or go through these, like, it can be kind of daunting, but like once you figure out the process, like you just like everybody's been having to do it for a bit. Like they know what number they can hit. They build, right? Aaron and I were talking about it just a little bit before the show. He's like, I know that I can build a 1.5 or 1 ACH house. So it's just it's the getting over the learning curve and the hump and learning to detail those things in the proper sequence. But we people literally, right when you show up to a house whether it's gonna perform well or not, because somebody's gone around and literally taped every single staple on the poly, right? Like everything's sealed up. But it's you assign one person to be maybe like the air boss or something on site and walk around and do your due diligence. And because every time I walk into a house and it's nobody's fault, but there's holes everywhere. I'm like, just take a little bit more time, spend somebody walk around for an hour or two and look at stuff, and saves a lot of hassle.
Well, I think we're going to have to add to the number of trades we have on a project. And I think an energy advisor needs to be added as a trade. And just as a builder, you have to realize, okay, I need to add an energy advisor. And yeah, they're my carpenters, but one of them is also going to be my air sealing specialist. And you just have to, as an industry, we're just going to have to learn to do that. It's basically going to be the same pains that the industry went through when indoor plumbing became a thing. Framing did not allow for indoor plumbing. It's true. If you've renovated a house that had plumbing added after the fact, you've seen the floor joists. It's the same idea, and I think just as an industry, we need to sort of put our thinking cap on and go, okay, we've got to add some trades to the process. And if we do that, everybody's life's probably going to be a little bit easier. And hopefully we start building better.
Yeah. Yeah. Little things, little baby steps get there.
So Brett, question for you. Let's say a client wants, they got a lot they purchased a year ago. They're thinking about building. They've been on Pinterest boards and they've got an idea of like what kind of home they want to build. You're right, that classic process, they start going out looking for either a contractor locally who can help steer them, or an architect to help steer the process first. When do you think an EA like yourself gets involved? How early in the process would you want to be brought in there?
Ideally, before those plans are drawn and set in stone. Like, it'd be good to have a meeting with the homeowner, the client, the builder, whoever it may be, the drafts person or the architect or the designer, whoever they want to work with, and kind of maybe go through that. Pinterest board would probably be a really good point in time to be like, look, here's some great things about your ideas, and here's some things that you want to kind of be cautious of, or things that could get really expensive. So yeah, I think really at the very start of the design stage is kind of where we want to get involved, because once you paid somebody whatever it is, $5,000-7,000 to have those plans drawn and they're kind of signed off on and sent to us, then it's really hard to go back and crush dreams at that point.
Yeah, the client's emotionally invested at that point, right? In playroom, the master bedroom, and all those things.
Yeah, and then that's when it becomes expensive, because it's like, okay, you can have this, but we have to do X, Y, and Z to get there. So like that's when we start having to add things to the envelope, and upgrade the windows and the HVAC and all that stuff. Like, there's been some really good Mark Bernhardt once again did some really interesting research all over BC, and he showed that houses can hit like step 4, step 5, like all the higher tiers of pretty basic construction, and it all comes down to design and orientation and simplicity of the structure. You can get to step 5 with like R22 walls and double glazed windows and 1 air change, but you can't do it if you want to have crazy building, designs. So,
totally.
Yeah.
And just as a follow-up, if an EA would like to be involved that early, is, I mean, it's inside baseball, but is a current client for EA right now, is it more the builder who hires you, or do you find it's actually the homeowners who have awareness to know, actually, yeah, Brett should be one of the project partners, let's make sure he's there early? Who's hiring EAs right now when you look at that project cycle?
Yeah, I guess it depends, like provincially now because it's mandatory. So whether it's like a homeowner builder who wants to build like a carriage house in their backyard, um, it can be anyone really. It's like you either team with like you have a few different draftspeople that you typically work with, or builders have clients and then they come to you. So it can either be the homeowner, it could be the builder, it can be the designer or the draftsperson or the architect. Um, yeah, basically, but in other jurisdictions, maybe where this isn't a requirement and people want to get involved and try and build a more forward, thoughtful house, then I guess it's whoever's, leading the charge and paying the bills. I think you just need to be cognizant that like this is a valuable thing that should be implemented on your house to make sure that you're going to sequence things properly and you're going to have a healthy, durable home that's not going to have any issues down the road. Like I think there's lots of failures happening in fairly new construction, like 5-10 years down the road, and it's because there wasn't a lot of thought going into the design and the execution.
100%.
Well, we've just run over our hour, and if we don't have any further questions, sorry, I'm just seeing something coming in from Peter. I don't think it's a question. I think he's just saying excited for the future, which is great, Peter. Yeah. Any closing thoughts, Brett, before we wrap this up?
No, I don't think so. I appreciate the opportunity to be on here and meet everybody, and hopefully we'll kind of run into more of each other in the future. I really like what everybody's doing. I think collaboration is the key and learning from each other and helping to educate. I think the more we can just be all like really open and honest with each other, the better everybody's going to be. So, yeah.
Well, I don't know exactly when, Brett, but I will be back out in your neck of the woods, and we will definitely stay in touch. And
You got my number.
yeah, and hopefully we'll have a beer in person again.
Sounds good.
But yeah,
Thank you.
well, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us for another episode of BS and Beer Canada, and we will see you again in a month.